Hello and welcome to Transforming Worlds. On this episode, we are joined by Manda Scott.
Stories. We are a storied species. Everything we do hinges on stories we tell ourselves and each other about ourselves and each other and our place in the wider world. And so you need to create fiction, because the great thing, one of the wonderful cognitive neuroscience ideas that I picked up was that if I can create a fictional reality that feels real to you when you're reading the book, your brain does not distinguish between that and an actual event.
Right.
It's as if it were a memory, and it's as real as if it were a memory. And once you've lived it in that way, you can live it out in the world.
She was born in Scotland, as she says herself, at 318 parts per million of CO2. She was trained as a veterinary surgeon, but is now an award-winning novelist, host of the international chart-topping Accidental Gods podcast, and a long-time shamanic trainer. She's best known for the Boudica, the Dreaming series, but her latest novel, Any Human Power, ditches historical fiction in favour of contemporary Thrutopian narrative that explores the potential for a future we'd be proud to leave as our legacy. She believes that the way forward now is for everyone to bring the best of ourselves to the table, finding what future generations need of us so that we can shape a future we're going to be proud to leave behind. So join us in this incredible episode about Manda's work, our future, and our role in it. Tune in. So welcome, Manda, to Transforming Worlds. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you. And it's an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, I'm so delighted. I already enjoyed our pre-talk and I can't wait to dive in. So tell us, what is transforming for you these days?
The nature of how I connect to the web of life is transforming at the moment. And how my sense of the potential of the web of life. And so my core belief is that we are humans, all of humanity. Our birthright is to be self-conscious nodes in the hyper-complex system that is the web of life. And there are many, many, many conscious nodes in the web that are not human, but we have the capacity to be self-conscious. And at the moment, we're not even conscious that we are nodes in the web of life, most of us. Mm-hmm. And so most of my world is devoted to how do I help people become aware of the fact that we are nodes in the web of life, and second, to become self-conscious to the point where we can ask the web, what do you want of me? And respond to the answers in real time, and that be our motivation as we move through life. We tend to be very head-mind motivated, and we need to be heart-mind connected motivated. And these last few weeks, something is shifting, and I think it's the kind of thing that will be obvious in retrospect. And at the moment, it just feels as if someone took the kaleidoscope and spun it all. And it had quite a stable picture, and now it really doesn't. A long, long time ago, I read a book by Alfred, come to me, the guy who discovered ley lines in the UK. And he was describing, he used to be an Arctic explorer, a Victorian gentleman Arctic explorer. And he was walking across a snowfield in the Arctic, blazing blue sky, sun, ice, warm, bright day, and he fell in through the ice without realizing he was doing it. And suddenly, from blazing blue, warm, everything bright, he was in cold, black, and didn't know which way was up. And obviously he got out. Alfred Watkins, that was his name, because he described it afterwards. And he said that discovering the nature of ley lines and how they worked was a similar impact for him, that sense of utter disorientation suddenly without warning. And then you have to kind of try and find which way is up and get yourself out. And it feels a bit like that, as I'm not completely disoriented, but I have that sense of where I thought the floor was, there is no floor anymore. Where I thought the edges were, there are no edges. And partly we're watching democracy being dismantled very fast in the States. We're recording this on the day that Canada, thankfully, elected somebody sane. And so really realizing that what happens in the US could easily happen in the UK, that by the next election, it may not be safe to be here. And everything that we take for granted in terms of the rule of law just doesn't work anymore. But I think also beyond that, at an energetic level, at a spirit being level, things are shifting in ways that I don't yet understand. That was a very long-winded answer. I'm sorry.
I love it. I love it. Very inspiring answer. So, did you always know this?
Not so that I would have framed it in that sense, but as far as I can remember back, discovering how to connect to the gods of the land was my driving force, yes.
How did you do that?
As a kid, I um, I read books that I thought would help me because back in the 60s when I grew up, there was no internet. There were not even, as I was growing older in the 80s when I was a student, there were kind of Xeroxed A4 sheets that people would send. If you asked the right people, you'd get it in a plain brown envelope. There wasn't anything like that. So I read books and tried to do what they said. When I was a child at school in the hockey team, I was doing little ceremonies to Mithras, who was basically the only god that I knew that was a real god, not the fake Christian god that we were being sold. And developing a relationship with that entity insofar as I understood it. So a lot of it was very blind. But I knew that I needed to know.
Yeah. But you're onto something there, because this blind thing, and with us having been born in the previous century, this can be very confusing, as your story about this gentleman going underwater. But what brings you back up and reconnects you with the surface, or with the goings on, which are above, around, below, and in all directions, is trust.
Yes.
Is a sentience that says there's something there and I want to connect with it. And that's where the connection can happen. If not, it can't, because our willpower is there as a receiver and as a connector, as an element in the dialogue, to say, I want to be in connection. I want to be in conversation. And probably that is what activates our ability to be self-conscious, to look at ourselves as an agent in a web.
Yes.
But before that, you can't, because we're victimized, we're assuming roles that we're taught that we need to, take on.
Yes.
We, unfortunately, more often than not, have been taught that there is a truth outside of ourselves that's right.
Yes, particularly if you're brought up in one of the kind of theocratic hierarchies.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
And the funny thing is that for me, I grew up in a military dictatorship. So what I recall from that time as a child is the intense fear that people had. I can really sort of, also doing a lot of my own awakening and spiritual work. This is something that I've been able to recollect and connect with and say, what was happening, and this sense of absolute fear, not for lack of control, perhaps because there was an excess of control.
Well, certain people had control
Right.
in order to remove agency from other people.
Exactly.
That's the nature of military dictatorship, is that basically the straight white men at the top get to have control that they think will make them feel safe. And of course, when you're that wounded inside, there is no feeling safe. But you grab more and more and more control and feel less and less safe. But everybody else gets the fallout. This is the nature of the trauma culture, I think.
Yeah.
And our tendency to elevate the dark triad into positions of power. And there's a wonderful book called The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengrow. And they demonstrated that throughout the 300,000 years, if not longer, of human evolution, there were social technologies to make sure that the dark triad of psychopathy, narcissism, and sadism did not acquire power over other people. And our culture not just abandoned those safeguards, we welcomed the dark triad. And the US is looking at that level of fear now, I think.
Yes.
And it takes a long time to get out of it. And they want, if you read any of the stuff of Project 2025 and ancillary, Curtis Yarvin, they want the whole world to be under their control. And even then they won't feel safe, but they're going to try.
Which is exactly what we shouldn't be mimicking, right? Because in the in the sense of what you resist persists, right? If we try to bring alternative construct and alternative impositions, alternative systems of rigor, then we are
We're
reproducing.
just making it the same. Yeah.
Right.
Yes. No problem is solved from the mindset that created it.
That's right.
So we need a whole new mindset. Yes, absolutely.
And what's the value of being lost in that then?
There's the epistemic humility, I suppose. That sense of however many narrative dystopias we're fed, we actually don't actually know where we're going because complexity is a thing. And our world is so complex now. It always was. You know, a human cell is complex. Organs are complex. A human being is complex. Cultures are complex. But our global culture is hyper complex and growing more complex on an exponential scale. And Daniel Schmachtenberger says one of his very many memorable things is what is going to finish humanity is our failure to get to grips with exponential growth. And he was talking mainly about AI, but I think also the complexity of human culture there. And I would say we don't need to get to grips with it. We need to connect to the web of life, because the web of life is also a hyper complex essence, entity of which we are an emergent part. And that pretending we can predict what's going to happen next is futile and not useful. But what we need to do is to ask the web what it needs of us in the trust, as you said, trust, transformation happens at the speed of trust. That was used to be one of the old XR statements, that the web is striving towards balance.
Of course.
And that balance is innate in the flourishing of life, because where I would like to think we can get to is a place where all life flourishes. And Robin Wall Kimmerer says true flourishing is always mutual. And that's humans and the more than human world, we all need to flourish together. And my baseline assumption is that the web of life is aiming towards that level of mutual flourishing. And that my job is to put myself in service to life, not to try and plan where I think we're going to go.
But that must be something so hard to do. One morning you woke up and you picked a pencil and then you started writing the Boudica series?
I was already writing. I'd already been on a bunch of writing courses and was writing TV scripts. I grew up in the era of someone called James Herriot, who wrote a bunch of veterinary books in the UK, which had the result of making it orders of magnitude harder to get into veterinary school. But having got in there, I had that model of someone who was a veterinary practitioner and a writer. And I spent my lifetime, my younger life reading books. My escape zone from a somewhat dysfunctional background was into books. So my assumption had always been that I would be a veterinary practitioner and write. But then I became an academic clinician. And if you're going to write anything as an academic clinician, you have to be writing actual papers for publication. You're not writing fiction. So that didn't work out the way I thought. But I wrote crime novels because I didn't need to do any research. By the time I got to the Boudica book, serious research, I did not have time when I was working full time at the vet school. But I could write crime novels and wrote the first one. And it got shortlisted for the Orange Prize, which was really unlikely and spectacular. And I completely did not make the most of it because I didn't realize that this was unlikely and spectacular. My assumption was you write a novel, it gets shortlisted for a major prize. Yay, that's the way it goes. But that gave me then a better publishing contract so that I could afford to go part-time, basically.
Wow.
And I still, for a long time, until the Boudica books, my assumption was that I would earn enough money writing to then be able to do the bits of veterinary work that I wanted to do. And it was only when I got to the Boudica books, I had to do really serious amounts of research and just did not have time to do anything else, that I stepped back from the veterinary work.
Which is also a labor of faith and love and believing in the future, right? You can't write a book otherwise.
Or believing in, I was doing shamanic work by then, and I was absolutely believing in the gods and the guides that were going, now you need to do this. because I had been writing crime novels, and writing the Boudica books arose completely from a vision quest that I did, and
Yes.
was totally contrary. I had to shift to a completely different publisher because my old publisher was locked into me being a crime thriller writer,
Which had only
and
been the
they
practice round.
yeah, exactly. And my guides kept saying, "This is an apprenticeship. Keep going. Just do what you're doing. Do what you're doing." Because I'm like, "This. Why are we doing this? This is crime novels. Really? Is that going to change the world? Just keep doing what you're doing." Okay. And it was. It was exactly an apprenticeship. But took them to the old publisher, and my editor said, "We'll publish these to keep you happy, but history doesn't sell." And I absolutely was not interested in a contract on that basis. So I had a really good agent, and we shifted to a different publisher. So yeah.
Amazing. So obviously all of your work speaks to my heart, and what you're saying now is so interesting to me in sort of the natural sense of linking it to myself and my own journey. So for me, I always say I've never been alone since I arrived on planet Earth, at least this
Okay.
time round. But that was something that was not allowed, not talked about. Words like guides, like forget it, go up to your room, you're not having dinner tonight,
Right. Really.
kind of thing, kind of situation
That's
I was in.
hard.
I grew up in a very scientific household. And so room for fantasy, for play, for connection with the natural and the unseen, although they were present in a different way, were not things that were talked about.
Right.
As that started emerging through you, how did you deal with sort of the fact that this new language and this new way of being in the world was who you were becoming?
That's a really interesting question. And I think along with all of that, I also knew that from a very young age that I was not heterosexual. And there is something about stepping over that threshold that gave me license to step over other thresholds as well. So I was openly lesbian at the vet school, but I was also openly doing shamanic studies and bringing that. I was an anesthetist, and the anesthesia is taking your patient to the borderline with death and bringing it back. And yes, you have all the machines that go ping, and you need to know what all the numbers are, and you absolutely have to do the science. But it's definitely also a felt sense art. And I was teaching students, and there were the ones who were interested in that and the ones who completely weren't. But just because they weren't doesn't mean I wasn't able to say that it was a thing.
Okay.
So up to a point,
Yes.
I had to compartmentalize bits of my brain. So there's the bit that absolutely understands the blood pressure monitors and the breathing monitors and the blood responses, and knows the science of anesthetizing this horse so that it will not kill the surgeon or itself. And there's the other part that's in the dream time with the horse, and being able to accept that each of them is right and they're not mutually exclusive is part of the dance of being. I later studied acupuncture and then homeopathy, and again, each of these in reductionist science is absolutely people would rather not hold a conversation than hold a conversation about
Yeah,
that.
I know.
So there we go. But what I got to was I have seen these work, particularly in a veterinary context, and therefore it's my job to work out how they work by their own systems rather than to question whether they work. Because my job is to be a healer. And in the end, I now do shamanic healing, which makes homeopathy or acupuncture look really normal.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's not my job to ask whether it's working. It's my job to learn how to do it. And then now that I teach this, how do I teach it to other people?
Yeah.
And I think being able, I don't know, I mean, who knows, but very early, if I wasn't able to do that, I would have had to pick one or the other. And as it was, I was able to keep both going together for quite a while.
Yes. You're a trailblazer for many of us, because I think that this is the conundrum we are all caught in right now, having to be part of a system while at the same time realizing that alternatives exist, are possible, and are viable.
But I was very lucky, I think it's also worth saying, because I decided I was a horse anaesthetist, and there were very, very few of those in the country, and horses are very hard to anesthetize. So I got a lot of free rein in a situation that otherwise veterinary surgery, the actual cutting of things and stitching them back together, was incredibly patriarchal.
Yeah.
And probably would have crushed me, but they needed someone who could anesthetize the horses and get them off the table alive. So I got a lot of space to be who I was. As long as I could keep the horses alive, then fundamentally nothing else really mattered that much.
And then perhaps because of your equine adventures, you started moving into the space of myths and gods and weaving
Well, I was already in the space of myths and gods, but yes,
into
absolutely.
stories.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And that became an incredible success. But you've left that behind. You're into Thrutopian narratives now. So tell us, what is a Thrutopian narrative?
Thrutopian is the middle line between dystopia and utopia. And for me, Thrutopia is what we need very, very urgently at this moment in the chaos of our civilizational collapse. So dystopia is obviously when things go badly wrong, and we have way too many of those. And if anybody who's listening is a writer, please never write anything dystopian ever again. My friends, colleagues who write dystopian things, there's always a belief that if I, the writer, show how bad it's going to be, then all the readers, everybody reading it, will change their behavior and the world will be a better place. That's almost always the motivation behind writing dystopias. That, and they're dead easy. They're infantile in how easy it is to imagine how bad it's going to be. And I did a master's in regenerative economics nearly 10 years ago now, and I wrote my dissertation on the cognitive neuroscience of language. And I was a real neuroscience geek when I was a vet. I loved it. And I could do this, yay. But dystopia is that the concept that basically the reason the world is in the state it is a knowledge deficit model. That doesn't work. It never has, it never will. In terms of neurolinguistics and cognitive neuroscience, it cannot work. And I need people to understand this. Explaining how bad things are going to get is utterly pointless, because unless you offer people alternatives, I could hold a gun to your head, and if all I say is you need to change your behavior, I'm going to end up shooting you, because what are you going to do? What do you need me to do? Speak a different language? You want me to stand on my head? You want me to walk backwards? What do you want me to do? You want me to change my race? Change my different behavior is not a useful request. And it doesn't matter how threatening we are. I have to give you a reason to change. And generally speaking, positive reinforcement is better than positive punishment. Agency, which is the ability to do it. Direction. You're locked in a concrete box. I need you to understand that you are in a concrete box and that out there is a world of connectedness much, much better. I need to show you the door. I need to give you the tools to open that door. And I need to make sure that you know you're not chained to the floor. Motivation, agency, direction, and empowerment. And unless I can offer you all four of those, you cannot act. So Thrutopia, by definition, starts in a recognizable present and offers a route map walking through towards a future that we would all be proud to leave to the generations that come after us. So it's a route map for being a good enough ancestor, in essence. And I need to say, I got the word from Rupert Reed, who was a professor at the University of East Anglia. And when I started the book, I also started a masterclass. And I called up Rupert and said, hey, you want to come teach on my masterclass? And he said, what are you calling it? And I hadn't got an answer. And he said, oh, well, it's Thrutopia Masterclass then. And he wrote a paper back in 2017 in the Huffington Post. You need to start where we are. And you need to give people motivation, agency, direction, and empowerment. And then you have a Thrutopia. And the key thing to say, now that I have written a Thrutopian novel, is it's incredibly hard. You need to think way outside of the box, but you have to show people how they're getting out of the box. the reason it might be easier now than it was when I started writing in 21 is even when I came to show this to publishers, they couldn't get their head around the idea that the existing system was broken and was going to disintegrate. And now it's disintegrating around us. So that much is easier. But that means we have to be much, much more radical in our imagining of what's possible. We have to do it. We have to stop clinging on to the idea that what we used to believe is going to happen, because it can't and it won't.
Right. And then there's all of this sort of unpacking of where it is possible, when it is possible, because in Any Human Power, you also play with characters and timelines to show that there are multiple perspectives in looking at that Thrutopian journey, which eventually becomes transformational, but it cannot be transformed from only one point of view. So when you bring in sort of your characters and you build that, it also requires quite some work from the reader to interpret,
Okay.
right? To
Go on.
interpret those metaphors. How does one go about that? Did you sort of really tap into your own experiences and the things that you had, for example, through your shamanic journeys, through your own quests, had experience and then brought them into story form, or did it emerge as you were writing? How did it unfold?
All of the above. So the root of it, or at least let's say the kernel of it, arose explicitly. I was teaching online because it was COVID 21, summer solstice, and I had a series of visions which, let's keep this short, instructed me to go and sit in a particular place on the hill that I live on, in a particular frame of mind for at least an hour as the sun goes down until further notice. I had a few things to set up. It took me a while to get the physical things that were needed because it was COVID. And so I had the visions on the 21st of June, and I started sitting at the end of July. And by the 9th of August, I need to write a book, and it needs to be this kind of book, and this is how it needs to start. I had the first scene. And I thought I'd given up writing. I came back from Schumacher, where I'd done the regenerative economics, and I started the podcast, and I started Accidental Gods membership, and doing all of those things, thinking that this is my life now. And okay, I have to write a new book. Writing books is hard, as you know. It's not that I don't love it, it's just that it takes a lot of time. And I thought it was too slow, but I also, what came while I was sitting on the hill was, I by then was been doing the podcast for 2.5 years, and I was thinking that was going to change the world. And what my guide said was, you can't expect everyone to stitch it together in the way you're stitching it together, because not everybody listens to every episode.
Yes.
So you have to create stories. We are a storied species. Everything we do hinges on stories we tell ourselves and each other about ourselves and each other and our place in the wider world. And so you need to create fiction, because the great thing, one of the wonderful cognitive neuroscience ideas that I picked up was that if I can create a fictional reality that feels real to you when you're reading the book, your brain does not distinguish between that and an actual event.
Right.
It's as if it were a memory, and it's as real as if it were a memory. And once you've lived it in that way, you can live it out in the world.
Yeah.
So the origin was from a journey, and then this is not a spoiler, it's on the back cover, people. The main character dies at the end of the second chapter. And I had that whole first scene with her and her grandson, and she makes him a promise that if he needs her and he asks, she will do whatever she can to come. And then she's held to that promise. And all the rest of the book is her keeping that promise while being locked in the between place between the lands of life and the lands of death. And that is a very distinct place in shamanic practice. Psychopumping, which is the ushering of the souls of the newly dead from life into death, is one of the core requirements of an indigenous shaman. And we need to be really clear that I practice contemporary shamanic practice, which is not, I'm not pretending that I'm a shaman. I don't think anyone from the West can be, and anyone who tells you they are is on some kind of weird power trip.
It's commercially occupied.
To walk away. Yes. But we can still use the tools. The tools were offered to us, and they are utterly amazing and life transforming. But we just need to be really clear that there's a distinction. But psychopumping is still a thing, and particularly in our culture, because we don't teach people how to die, which is kind of an oversight, given that it's one of the few things that's absolutely guaranteed. And you're here, and you're going to die.
And it happens multiple times, even in life.
Potentially, yes.
So it doesn't actually take being incarnate to be alive, and it doesn't actually need us to die in order to not live. So once we start understanding that, we can see life as the beautiful journey of learning that it is, and of unfolding, where those learnings are so important also in the work that you do, and I so admire, because we can role model for others what it might be, not by showing them, not by telling them, but precisely, as you say, through storytelling, helping prep that muscle memory of our sentience to understand and feel the possibility. And then it will take the form that it needs to take for that other person. Not something we can't decide for others, but it's planting this possibility into their consciousness so that we can do what humans do best, which is, make a conscious effort to transform. So do you have a definition for transformation?
I think I would say it's emergence into the full potential of interbecoming.
It's a beautiful definition. I love it.
And again, the epistemic humility of, I would say, the nature of transform. So for me, everything hinges around us becoming self-conscious nodes in the web of life. And I cannot be a self-conscious node in the web of life where I am thrumming with that aliveness. And it's coursing through me, and I'm offering gratitude, compassion, joyful curiosity, the 3 pillars of my heart mind, to the web, and receiving back. But I'm constantly on the pinhead of the moment, asking what you need of me and prepared to move in any direction. I can't do that if I have a presupposition of what the web needs of me. I have to be in that moment of all potential all of the time. And then anything is possible. But our culture particularly has ideas of how the world could be and should be and will be. And urgently now we need to let go of those, because they're not taking us in a useful direction, I feel. So the book is called Any Human Power, the novel. And that comes from Ursula Le Guin, who was one of my greatest heroes, who said, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems unassailable, but then so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. And often the impetus to that resistance comes from art, and often our art, the art of words." That's the full quote from her. If we continue down the route of the death cult of predatory capitalism, then we are going to see total human extinction. And the fact that people like to pretend that this isn't a thing suggests to me that they're not actually reading the science very clearly. If we get beyond 2 degrees of warming, we will see runaway warming. And I don't care how many tins of beans you've managed to plant in your underground bunker, you will not survive 10 degrees C of warming. Apart from anything else, the seas will be dead. And phytoplankton currently produces half of our oxygen. And we currently live at 18% oxygen. I used to be an anaesthetist. I know the oxygen levels in the air. 9% is the equivalent of standing at the top of Kilimanjaro. And that's assuming that there's anything left on the land to continue producing land-based oxygen. And the way we're going, that's looking pretty unlikely too. So I don't want that, and I don't think it's inevitable. But I think pretending that we can just edge a little bit towards total extinction but not get there is to totally fail to understand the nature of biophysical tipping points. And so this is partly, I don't believe in frightening people into action because it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I do believe in telling people that pretending that the existing system can continue is a non-starter. Please accept that. And once we've accepted that, then what do we want? And for me, the way forward, the only way forward that I can see is that we find ways to talk across the boundaries, which is hard because the wounds in our culture are self-inflicted and huge. But let's pretend we can do that. What are the values that we can all agree on? And I would suggest, certainly mine would be beginning with integrity, compassion, generosity of spirit. If we go with that, courage probably, from those values, values, it doesn't get us. What are our asks? And for me, the asks that are unassailable are clean air, clean water, clean earth, clean, clear, courageous, compassionate connections between all parts of ourselves, which means we have to do the inner work between ourselves and each other, which means we also have to do the work of collective healing between ourselves and the web of life. If we've got that, if that becomes the main ask of every sentient human, capitalism is over.
Oh,
Because
in a
it's
millisecond.
not compatible with, exactly, it just stops in the moment. And the fact that we've got predatory vigilante bond markets that are defining how money is used just stops being a thing.
Yes. So, as you timed the podcast already, thanks to Canada, I will timestamp it according to Spain, because yesterday Spain and Portugal and parts of France had a massive lack of electricity, total shutdown, with all of the consequences of that. And I can't help myself, because of my cultural sort of shamanistic roots, to think, okay, so what are we being presented with? What is being shown to us? And for me, our mind capacity, our mental field, well, not just for me, but is electrical, and our heart field is magnetic. And as electromagnetic beings in a world that essentially communicates and resonates based on electromagnetism, we are being shown that we are way too much on the electric wavelength and way too little on the magnetic wavelength.
Right.
And as you were sharing this imagery, for me, what comes into my mind's eye, to call it a certain way, is that this connection on values and asks is an opening of our heart spaces, which is where we send our intentional energy to co-design the world that we live in. But what's important is that on terms of the mind, in that electrical space and of the mind, when we go into the abstract realm, oh, we all want world peace. Yes. We want to be kind to one another. Then it's very easy to agree. But then all of the assumption and presumption of everyone being like us takes over. Whereas the more concrete we become, like in all life forms, we become specialized. And the more concrete our thoughts become into the form of us, they can help us connect to the holding space, which is in our heart. So a lot of that work that we need to do societally and collectively is, how do we bring all of these mental constructs to the heart space, where only that which is congruent with life will continue. If it's not incongruent with life, it cannot subsist. Just like from a vibrational point of view, it cannot be there because it's not compatible. But we're all living here, all of us, Manda. Why?
Well, not all of us, but most of us. Most of the trauma culture is living in our heads because we don't know how to live in our heart space. Yes.
I'd love to be there all the time, but frankly, I'm human, and I'm also influenced by the system. So I know that there are times where inevitably I'm much more mental, literally. In English, that works really well.
Yes.
I get totally mental.
Yeah. All right. So then the question becomes, how do we help people who may have no spiritual basis at all? Because we can talk about heart, mind all we like, but if somebody doesn't have a spiritual practice, that's a really hard thing to embrace. And I don't think there's time to wait until everybody has spiritual connections. This is really urgent now. And so I think the big question for now becomes, how do we build stories of progression towards the world that is predicated on clean air, clean water, clean soil, clean connections, and is not predicated on the destructive death cult of predatory capitalism? And partly we need to redefine what it is to be human, because our trauma culture has told us for 2,000 years, if not longer, that a zero-sum game where some people climb to the top of a very slippery slope and it doesn't really matter what happens to people at the bottom, and it definitely doesn't matter what happens to the rest of the web of life, is human nature. And actually it's not. But we've made it seem to be because our narrative structure has promoted that. So our television, our social media chaos, our news, and our fiction have all promoted this particularly toxic view of what it is to be human. So shifting that, and shifting it in conversations like this, shifting it in our everyday conversations, shifting it in the ways we behave with people, I think is one of the most urgent things we can do, and seeding out the knowing that this is what we're doing. So I don't know how many people listen to your podcast, but let's say there's 10,000. If there's 10,000 and each of them speak to 3 people and each of those speak to 3 people, we know from COVID that our number of 3 spreads it around the world in about a week.
Yeah.
Everybody is afraid of what happens when the system collapses, and we're watching it. We're going to see what happens in the US. I was, just before we came on, watching on one of the progressive news sites pictures of container terminals in the US where there are no containers because nothing is being sent over from China. And Donald Trump, for all that he's functionally insane, is giving us a very interesting view into the hard landing of capitalism ending.
Right.
When I was at college, regenerative economics, we spent 9 months trying to work out how to facilitate a soft landing from the end of capitalism, because we didn't want everybody falling off the edge of a cliff. And now they've just been kicked off the edge of a cliff. What happens? And how can we help to create a system that will support the people who have just been kicked out of a plane with no parachute? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think we're going to have to find it very, very, very fast.
Well, I think we all know we can. I really do. I think we all know we can. It's just what you've just described, this collapse, is necessary for us to let go. We're just not good at letting go.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be necessary for us to let go, because you don't want to live through the total collapse of capitalism around the planet.
It's true, but
die.
it goes back to sort of the neurocognitive side of things and the behavioral side of things. Like, I also know I have to lose weight, but if there's cake, I'm going to forget that instinctively at that moment. I told you I was mental. Here's an example. So, right? So continuing with the inertia, even if it's stagnant, of what is, for most of us, is a place of comfort. Okay. Until it becomes uncomfortable enough. And some people are more empathetic, other people are less empathetic. How uncomfortable are you with the fact that there are people suffering the consequences of your privilege? Well, I don't know. That's, but at some point, and I do believe that that point is very soon, that powerful number 3 that you pointed out, the moment we go beyond the tipping point, then there is this human viral capacity of the way we interpret the world, because of that very same seeking of comfort. I mean, look at memes, look at social media, blah, 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 blah. Everyone's repeating the same thing. Well, if that story, as you say, if that narrative starts to change, we will continue to use the vehicle of blah, 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 and it will continue to, be handed as the truth. But we need to, especially those of us who are creatively inspired, even if not talented, just creatively inclined, we need to help shape that story. We need to ignite that curiosity for that world that people know is possible. People know it. It's so much easier to carry on. And we've been told that, and we've bought into that carrying on is the way to do it. So
yeah, because it keeps the people in power who have the power, who want to keep power. That's the nature of the game.
Yes. But the reconnection to our sentience, to our sense of, it's not quite right. This doesn't feel quite good enough.
But we also know, I think, yes, you're right. Knowing that it's not right is key, motivation. But if we don't have the agency, direction, and empowerment, we're screwed and we're not going to go anywhere. And I think that's what matters now. I think if we wait until things are bad enough, that everybody feels the need to change, we're going to slide into barbarism. And I know epistemic humility is a thing, but I don't necessarily think that everybody being under pressure is going to turn everybody into a progressive person.
No.
I think that's extremely unlikely unless we have really good narratives that are taking hold outside of our echo chambers. We have to bring everybody with us. And we have to do that by having narratives that are so obviously something that you would want for your kids. Basically, people will pile into small boats and go across very dangerous stretches of water because they think their children will have a better life. What can we do to give everybody a sense that if we become pro-social human beings, if we stop the mindless fighting across chasms of things that truly don't matter, like the color of our skin or the language that we speak or lines that we've drawn on a map that are wholly irrelevant, how do we expand beyond those and become something that brings the best of ourselves to the table? If we don't give people actual narratives that show them the steps of that, I don't think people will know where to go or have a sense of how to get there.
Yeah,
and I think we need to do that before we get to the point where everyone's desperate.
Right, and there is also this kind of victim mentality and fear, which are, so removing us from these concepts of agency and empowerment because we feel it's not up to us and that we might be the ones being left behind. And then that generates all manner of this kind of survival impulse and instinctual reaction that you were just pointing out. So perhaps that's already showing us that we shouldn't wait that long. That is what happens, because in the end we want survival so long as we're not the ones that are being compromised in any way.
That is obviously fear-based.
Yes.
How do we evolve a culture that is based on integrity and compassion and generosity of spirit and courage and curiosity of what could we do if we really tried? Human curiosity is absolutely a superpower. It's amazing. And if we put all of our curious capacity to creating an actual mutually flourishing future, again, predatory capitalism would be over tomorrow. So we're back to, we need to persuade everyone listening to this podcast that business as usual is done. It's not coming back. Please let go of it. And how can we all work together to make a future that would work? What would it look and feel like?
Yes.
If you were to build a future, if you were to wake up tomorrow morning, how would you feel if everything were okay? And most people get to that and they feel confident and safe. What would it take for you to feel confident and safe that isn't crushing everybody that you think is the problem? What would that feel like? And how would we get there?
Yeah. Yeah. So it does need this remembering, reminding, and respecting, to put a different spectacles on and look at it again.
Yeah.
And which is the origin of the word respect, to look again. Can we do that? And can we allow for more? Because we talked briefly, I think, outside of the podcast about keeping things small and realizing that actually the movement is the reverse of that, is allowing for everything. And then possibility is part of that equation as well. Yeah. Now, you do this a lot with people. You do meditations, you do, even guided quests of sorts, and help people think about things like death and legacy and all of the things that are so important. So you see a lot. If we were to embrace this and suddenly, due to the magnetic force of the heart, we would reach that tipping point and it starts now, what would society look like? What would, the legacy that we leave to the next generations look like?
We'd be living genuinely connected to our communities of place, of passion, and of purpose. And those are three. And what allows there to be three is the internet. So communities of place are what they've always been, which are the people that you can walk to, perhaps cycle to, but people in your own geographic area. Passion and purpose are probably maybe in your geographic area, but they don't have to be. and you can reach them over the internet. And increasingly, I think, this may be taking it too flaky, but I think we're relearning how to connect to people in other ways, which was absolutely an Indigenous skill. A friend of mine, this is an aside, but I think it's quite important. He is a white person, but he went to an Indigenous gathering in North America by invitation. And two things happened. First of all, it was a very long drive. He'd driven most of the day. Everybody had brought food. Food's put in the center, but you can't start eating until people have finished asking questions of the shaman. And my friend was really hungry, and people were asking very long and wordy questions, and he's sitting there going, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. Inside his head, just shut up so I can eat. And he had a blinding, like, ice pick headache, as if someone had literally just stabbed him. And he looked, and the shaman was staring at him, and he heard the shaman's voice in his head going, no, you shut up.
Oh.
So he did. And then later, when they're finally allowed to eat, he's next to there's a little girl who's about 3 years old, and then her mother next to him. And there's a lot of chocolate in the middle because that's what you bring. And the little girl, what's the chocolate? Can I have the chocolate, Mummy? And Mummy says, yes, but you have to ask the shaman. And she takes a breath to ask, and the mother says, no, ask him inside. So she's teaching a 3-year-old to connect without having to speak. This is an integral part of our birthright also. So, and part of what we do with the dreaming work, the shamanic dream work, is helping people to dream together. So our connections of passion and of purpose are those people where, so purpose is often, so my purpose might be podcasting and writing, my passions might be, at the moment, finding ways to engage with my ponies such that we are both totally on the same page energetically. And there are other people who are into that. There are other people like you who are into podcasting, but we might not join up on the pony page. So finding our tribes, basically. Francis Weller says, one of the hallmarks of our trauma culture is that we have never got over that belief that when we look down at the fire, when we look up, there will be 40 pairs of eyes who really care about us. And we will be looking back into those. Rebuilding. What part of what we need to do is rediscover the social technologies that will work in the 21st century, which might not be the ones that worked 10,000 years ago. Or if you're in South or North America, 600 years ago. Technologies that work now to allow us to have heart connections so that we rebuild the serotonin mesh of connection that is one of the real well-being and thriving networks in our brain. We tend to feed ourselves dopamine drips, and that's not, it will never, there is no amount of dopamine, there are no amount of boxes from Amazon or sugar or alcohol or pornography or likes on the internet or winning elections, all of which give us these little dopamine hits. They will never fill the void inside that is the lack of the serotonin connections. The serotonin connections are built by reciprocal pride. I am doing what is mine to do, and I am recognized in that by people who I respect. So reciprocal pride and reciprocal respect. I am respected by people whom I respect. I feel pride in that. And that is what makes my heart soar and takes me to the edges of myself so that I will give anything to help this mesh of connection to grow and to thrive. And it's not just humans, it's the more than human world as well.
Of course, yes.
And so we need to rebuild those. That's an urgent part of what we're doing. In our finding our tribes and doing the work to make those build. Inevitably, we have to change every part of the death cult of predatory capitalism, but core parts are our governance systems our existing governance system is not broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to elevate the dark triad. Mm-hmm. But it's not fit for purpose if that purpose is the continuation of complex life on Earth. So we need to rediscover, and Audrey Tang has already got a whole bunch of very functional models already tried and tested for creating governance systems using the internet, using AI, that actually work, that bring people together across divides and help them to find what Audrey calls the uncommon ground that unites us. So we change our governance systems completely. We probably change from Hobbesian geopolitical boundaries to bioregions, because Hobbes stated that a nation state is that political entity within whose boundaries a specific political unit has a monopoly on violence, and that's not a useful way to be. Bioregions and enhanced connections within the bioregions, and possibly there's a woman called Primavera de Filippi who has an idea of what she calls coordinations, which is I am united with tribes that don't have to be local, but are united with common value systems. And I can find the other tribes who share my common value systems, and we can create a network, a distributed net of common value systems. So bioregions and coordinations. Local food, we have to get rid of industrial farming. It is a myth that it is necessary to feed 8 billion people. It's not, absolutely is not, and it is destroying us. So we have to rebuild the biome of the land. This is part of clean water, clean soil, clean earth. We stop putting chemicals on the land. We stop having chicken houses with 1 million chickens in them, which we're all in chicken lockdown because there's bird flu, and there's bird flu because there's up the north of this county, there are chicken houses with 1 million chickens in them. You have to stop that. I'm not suggesting, I don't think that being vegan or vegetarian is necessarily the way forward. If you want to do it, don't let me stop you, but don't tell us that it's saving the world. It's only saving the world if that stops you consuming the output of industrial farming. So that's essential, is that we stop industrial farming tomorrow. If everybody committed to not eating anything that came from industrial farming, it's over by tomorrow. Stop that. We have to change the nature of money, and that's a whole other podcast, but we have the models. Every single thing we need to do,
yes.
we know. It's all out there. It's just stitching it together. That's what any human power was about, was pulling it all together and turning it into a vision of a world that works and how we get to it. So community, local communities, local food, changing the nature of governance, changing the nature of money. By changing the nature of food, we also change the nature of what wellness is, because our current health system is not a health system, it's a sickness system. The entire pharmacological industrial complex is as dangerous as the agricultural industrial complex, and it's a given that war ends instantly, because we don't need it anymore, because we've stopped this bizarre idea that murdering people is useful and that it leads to something that we want to get to. And I think, so Indy Johar published a Substack today, and I just want to read you a tiny bit of it, because I think he's right. He says, let me start where it hurts. We have failed systemically, emphatically, repeatedly. I say we because I, that is Indy, helped build the very architecture now buckling under its own contradictions. Impact hubs, WikiHouse, Open Desk. Projects conceived with the best intentions, yet constrained by the same balance sheet myopia we claimed to transcend. Social enterprise, impact investments, ESG gloss, they have proved inconsequential beside the scale of transformation the 21st century demands. The whole Substack. It is really urgent now. Yes. And I think the narrative of start small and slow has had its day.
Okay.
And we need to start big and fast.
Yes.
But that still means we have to meet people where they are. You can't force someone into spiritual evolution. You can't force them into changing for something better. What you can do is turn into a military dictatorship and crush them. And we don't want that.
No.
And so if we don't, we have to be producing the stories that show people how the world could be better, because the thing that gets people moving is that yearning for a future that they can see that's almost within reach.
Yes.
This is what gets people onto small boats crossing the water, and they're coming to a fantasy, because the world that they think is going to be better, certainly in the UK, does not exist, but they imagine that it does. And so we want to create something that is possible, that is there if we just yearn for it. And then people will throw everything. It doesn't have to be easy. It doesn't have to be immediately gratifying. People will give up a lot of stuff to get to the top of Everest, because they know that when they get to the top, it will feel absolutely expletive deleted amazing. But we need to build the visions of the Everests, and we need to make it worth it.
Yes, we do. Yes, yeah. And you're definitely doing an amazing job at that. Tell us where people can find your work.
Thank you. So Accidental Gods, plural, all one word, .life is, and the podcast is Accidental Gods. So the membership is accidentalgods.life and the podcast is Accidental Gods. Those are the big ones. Thrutopia, and that's THRUTOPIA.life is the masterclass. I will I need to update it, but it's there and you can do it as a self-study. Those are probably the big ones. The book is at Manda Scott, all one word, .co.uk, or indeed any good wood shop. Please do not buy it from the giant vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity, otherwise known as Amazon. Please buy anywhere else except that. And you can get it as an audiobook. It's a wonderful woman who did an amazing audio recording of it. So yes, it's there. Or an ebook or hardback or paperback.
Yes. Or lend it to a friend as well.
Or lend it to a friend,
which
or
is
get
what
it from
I
your
did.
local library. Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yes. Share it.
Yes, share it.
Get
Lots.
the word out.
3 people each, and we got it. Because I still, it was written, I started in 21, we published it this time last year, and it's still relevant. It still is a vision of how we could get through.
Definitely, yes. So our last question on the podcast is something that comes from a book I wrote in 2012 called Change Ahead, where I talk about when we're facing the unknown, we can't have answers. We've got questions. So what's going to be the next question in our quest for questions?
For me, there is only one question that ever matters, and it's, I am heart connected to the web of life, and I ask, what do you want me to do? I actually ask, what do you want of me, which is a slightly more open, because doing is a bit, sometimes it's a being answer. What do you want of me to the web of life? And respond as best as I know how in any given moment. Nothing else matters.
Yeah. And there are so many ways to receive the answers, right? So when you ask a question like this to the web of life, the answer is not immediate, and it's probably a whisper of some kind.
Absolutely.
So maybe have a journaling practice and let the words come through you, or seek the moments of stillness. Be ready to listen is important as well. It's my mission with this podcast to listen, because I do so much speaking. This is the place where I want to hear those answers, and sometimes they come through wonderful people like you. So
can I give one more anecdote, because I think it's potentially useful. I can't remember who this was. It was one of the slightly more slick American spiritual people, but quite good. And he was describing, he used to work in Silicon Valley, high-tech stuff, and he was learning to just move his energy up and down his body, so basically going up the chakras of the suns and back down again. And he got to the point where he was being asked to be present in 25 meetings a week, which was basically his entire life was being spent in meetings. And he went to his line manager and went, I don't say anything in these meetings. And that person said, no, but when you're in the meeting, we get stuff done.
Yes.
And all he was doing was sitting there, moving his energy up and down. And that much attention to who we are and what we're doing can change the world. It really can.
Yes, so it is. Thank you, Manda Scott.
Thank you. This has been fantastic. Yes. Really good. Thank you for the invitation and the chance to speak.
Thank you.